All right, we're ready. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting on ordinance. It is September 11, and the time is 5:30. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Chairman Espinal,
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Shelley Peterson is absent. Councilwoman Mary Kay Harris. Present. Councilman Oscar Vargas.
Present.
Councilor Justin Boyens is absent. We have 3 present, 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. First item on the agenda, please.
Item number 1, an ordinance adopting the City of Providence official comprehensive plan. The following have been invited for a presentation. Robert Azar, Deputy Director, Department of Planning and Development. Timothy Shi, Community Planning Manager, Department of Planning and Development.
Thank you so much. I would like to acknowledge, we have Councilman Ron Powell, everyone. Councilwoman Thea Graves, thank you so much for being here tonight with us. We also have special guest, which is Mr. Asia and Dave Shed. Members of the public, thank you for being engaged, and for being here tonight, working on our community team, as well as communication team, and also our city solicitor. Good evening to you all. But we are in the middle of the final stages of finalizing the comprehensive plan, which is it's going to set the footprint for the next 10 years. And it's going to guide our housing, our investment, our need, transportation, etc. So it's important, it's critical that we're here. And I know the Department of Planning had, for the last couple of years, I've been conducting meeting, I think over 80 community meetings that put together a community input. We went back and built out and made some amendment based on recommendations that were made from the public. So you're here tonight to present to the council. This enters now our responsibility to see through this and see what we think about it, and whether we have an opinion or not, whether any amendments need to be made, or whether we can just move ahead and adopt the plan as it is. Also like to acknowledge Councilwoman Enterwalk for being here. So tonight we have invited a couple of special guests. Mr. Hayes and Mr. Tim Shed, who have a PowerPoint presentation that will walk us through to see exactly where we are today. To the members of the public, we will not be taking public comments. However, there is a public meeting, public hearing scheduled for next Monday, the 16th at 5:30. At that time, we'll be able to speak on this plan. So with that said, Mr. Azar, please take it away. Walk us through the PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, other council members. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here after a very long road that we've been on the past couple of years working on this comprehensive plan, engaging the public in all corners of the city. And I think we are at a point where we have a document that this draft comprehensive plan. We're very proud of it. We think it represents our best efforts at charting the city's growth for the next 20 years. As you know, this is a document that we have not really touched at all for the past 10 years. And it's time, both because of the state law that requires us to update the plan every 10 years, but also because conditions have changed so much since 2014. So what we're going to do tonight is walk you through the plan at a relatively high level. And we'll get into the specifics of the land use chapter, which is really the one that is seeing the most change and the one that is, I think, going to be most impactful.
We're in a meeting.
Most impactful to the built environment of our city. I'm going to turn it over to Tim Shea, our community planning manager, who has been really the face of this project as it pertains to the community engagement process. Tim's been out there at farmers markets and board meetings and events large and small throughout the city, really trying to meet people where they are and to talk about what they think the city needs and what can be improved. So it's been great having him on our team. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim to get us rolling.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much. I just wanted to test our clicker. Is there a way to put it into the whole presentation view?
Actually, excuse me, Tim, so, Berg, I think we'll adopt this as exhibit A, this presentation, so I was getting motion to enter into the record exhibit A. So.
Yeah. Team is there. In the right corner next to those settings, that one there.
This one here.
Try that. Beautiful. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Tim. We're also joined by Council President Miller and Chief Staff Bill Rose. Thank you for being here. Go right ahead.
Okay. Thank you again so much for having us. So I'm going to talk us through kind of the process that got here. I'll give a brief summary of the kind of key policy elements aside from the land use chapter, and then I'll hand it over to Bob to walk us through the land use chapter. So first of all, just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page, Bob mentioned it briefly, but comprehensive plan is our once a decade opportunity to bring together community members, business owners, a range of stakeholders to think about how the city has grown over the last 10 years and think about our vision for its future 10, 20 years from now. And so, of course, that vision touches on a lot of different topic areas. It touches on transportation, economic development, parks and recreation. And so a comprehensive plan has many elements, but one thing that is unique that Bob referenced is that it has this land use chapter. So we think about our vision for the city 10, 20 years from now, and then we tie that directly to how land is used, about what can be built where, and how we want the city to grow. So as was referenced, for more than a year now, actually 2 years, we've been engaging community members in a process that was really intentionally designed to be iterative, to kind of walk people through this plan making process. So we started in 2022 with a phase of engagement that was focused on really listening and hearing how people see the city changing, what they think are the most important issues. And then last year, we, through a variety of methods, whether that was online surveying, whether it was workshops co-hosted with community organizations, or many of you here, we hosted one workshop in every ward in the city. We also went to, as Bob referenced, community events, block parties, farmers markets, really to think collaboratively with community members about how we solve the challenges that the city faces moving forward. So that's really the foundation of the draft plan that we have with us here today. And this year we started the more formal process. In the spring, we presented the draft plan to our city planning commission, and we received comment and feedback there. We also took it out to the neighborhoods. We did a series of library drop-in feedback events, and we made changes during that city planning commission review phase before they passed it on to you here. But this is really the biggest part of that more formal review process before it gets passed on to the state. We have some beautiful images. We've got a lot of images from this process. These kind of feature different forms of engagement, whether smaller focus groups or tabling at events. But we were delivered to host these events in neighborhoods where we, historically haven't done the best job of connecting with people and encouraging their participation in these processes. So that was really deliberate. But we wanted to make sure we were doing events in every neighborhood in the city, in every ward in the city. And I think our plan is better for that. So I won't go too deep into our engagement summary. There's more online, but just one kind of graphic to point to is, our initial community survey. We asked people about their priority issues, what they're most concerned about, thinking about, that needs to be addressed over the next 20 years. And, no matter what neighborhood you were in, often no matter what demographic you're talking to, the housing crisis was issue number one around the city. So tenants, homeowners, people with kids looking to buy, people who were raised in the city and want to have a stake in its future, are really concerned about housing. And so that permeates a lot of the changes in this plan. But there were also a lot of pressing concerns around things like transportation, issues around climate, how we prepare for the climate changing, improving city services, and thinking about the design of our city, new development. So I'm going to move into kind of the summary of key policies here. There's a lot more depth in the draft plan, but if I could kind of give a one-sentence summary of each of these chapters, that's what the goal is here. But first of all, a vision. All these various topic areas have to be behind kind of one uniting vision. So we outline that as a more prosperous, sustainable, resilient Providence for all. A city that's vibrant, affordable, sustainable, beautiful, rich with economic opportunity. And then another key theme that we heard from community members was that we want Providence to thrive because of what makes it unique, being supported. So our quality of life, welcoming, our quality of life, people, places that make Providence unique. But a key part of why Providence is unique is because we embrace change, we welcome new people, new ideas, and new ways of living that benefit all of us. So here's a quick list of all the topic areas that I'm going to dive into now. So sustainability, this is of course a really important issue. So each chapter has a guiding goal, it has a set of objectives, and then implementing strategies. And the sustainability chapter is really focused on reducing our climate emissions, preparing for resilience to extreme weather, to stormwater, to heat island effect, conserving our areas of environmental quality, our parks and green spaces. But one key change here is it really aligns more with our climate justice plan and centering equity and environmental justice in these strategies. So that's kind of one key thrust of policy change. So moving on to the built environment, this is our chapter that's on kind of Providence's design, architecture, and the goals and strategies here focus on improving design standards and our review processes of new development, encouraging adaptive reuse of existing buildings and really focusing on green building practices, and also expanding our efforts at preserving really historic districts and unique places in the city. Bob's going to speak a little bit more to urban design and review as it relates to land use. Economic development. So this is a topic area where the goals and strategies here really focus on adapting and growing the city's economy through investments in key sectors, things like the blue economy, life sciences, but also arts and culture, workforce and small business development, and improving cities' infrastructure and services that are kind of the foundation of our economy. There's a chapter on housing in the comprehensive plan, and while our land use and zoning really impacts housing, there's also a chapter that thinks about how the city invests in housing, what type of housing we're encouraging. And the focus here is on encouraging more supply of housing and a real focus on long-term affordability. So how we invest in and encourage long-term affordable housing that supports communities with special needs in the city, that places housing near public transit, that's energy efficient and includes accessibility in its design. Bob will speak more on housing in a moment. So there's a chapter on mobility, which is kind of our transportation chapter. Has objectives on really every way of getting around the city. So the goal here is really to accelerate our transition to a more multimodal transportation system where people have safe and convenient options for how to get around, whether that's walking, taking public transit, driving, riding a bike. And there's a lot of codifying of, the city's recent Great Streets Plan and also RIPTA's long-range transit master plan. In this chapter, art and cultural resources. So the city recently had a planning process that was led by artists and culture bearers, our cultural plan. And so this really codifies the goals and strategies there that kind of shift to focus on centering the well-being of artists in the city and fostering a culture across our city's public life that's fostering vibrant, equitable, artistic and creative culture, thinking about its benefits to our neighborhoods, to the public realm, civic life. The people and public spaces chapter, this is our kind of parks chapter. And so there's a lot of momentum here. So this is really focused on continuing the investment that we've seen in the last decade in our parks and public spaces. A focus on making sure that programming is responsive to the communities that live near those parks and public spaces. We're incorporating climate resilience and stormwater management and how we think about our green spaces, how they're connected to each other, and how people, neighbors participate in the design use of those spaces. And then lastly, there's a pretty large chapter called Community Services and Facilities. This touches on city utilities, city services, also public facilities. So really kind of a broad range of topics in this one, but all about how we improve the quality of services in buildings and the coordination of them. So we can think of our electricity, our schools, our recreation centers, all touched upon in this chapter, but I encourage folks to look at the draft plan for more depth on that. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass this over to Deputy Director Azar to talk about land use.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Tim. All right, so I'm going to do a deep dive into land use because it's probably the most important chapter of this comprehensive plan. Under state law, the land use chapter has certain legal standing. Unlike the other chapters of the plan, which are incredibly important and they are policy statements that will guide the activities of the city. The land use section is unique because it is the one section that is legally binding on our land use regulations, specifically our zoning ordinance, and also the subdivision and development review regulations. So anything having to do with land use, any regulation, any zoning ordinance, it all has to tie back to the comprehensive. So we need to make sure that what we say in the comprehensive plan can then be implemented in the zone. So just to provide a little bit of context, 10 years ago, we developed the map on the left here, which is called the Areas of Stability and Change. And it's kind of a large-scale map that sets forth these dark blue areas where we expected to see most of the new development in the city. It also called out certain commercial corridors where we wanted to focus growth and higher density development. And in doing that, the hope was that it would take some of the pressure off of the residential neighborhoods so that they could be largely stable and we wouldn't expect to see a lot of change in the growth environment in those neighborhoods. That then translates into a much more detailed future land use map you see on the right-hand side, which then translates into our current zoning map, our zoning regulations. And that, we have found that the policies that we adopted in 2014 were a very good roadmap for development in the city. We did see a lot of new development that happened in these areas that we identified for growth. And I think at the time, these were the right policies to put in place, and they worked so well that we really didn't have to amend this plan at all over the last decade. So I would consider that to be successful. It had enough flexibility, it had enough direction, such that our zoning ordinance could work to facilitate the development that we've seen over the past 10 years. However, in recent years, we all know that the market has not been producing enough housing to meet the demand. And the result is that prices have skyrocketed to the point where we're not meeting the demand. We're seeing some of the highest inflationary housing costs of anywhere in the country. And that's due largely to the fact that we're just not producing enough housing. Now, zoning is not the only tool that exists to try to encourage housing. There are other tools that we talk about in the comprehensive plan, but I'm specifically going to talk now about the land use policies that we are proposing that we think will allow for more housing, not just in these areas of change, these growth areas that were identified in 2014, but also in the residential neighborhoods as well. And I understand that allowing for growth in our residential areas can be can provoke some anxiety, but as I'll describe, the idea here is that the growth that we're talking about allowing is very much consistent with the types of development that we've seen in the city since its founding. Okay, so we did this exercise again, looking at growth on a large scale, and we produced this map on the left, the growth strategy map, which translates once again into the future land use. The growth strategy map is a little bit more detailed than before. Blurry on the screen there, but hopefully you can see it in your handout. We call out different types of land uses from sort of the most highly regulated to lesser areas that are less regulated, but then also specific types of land uses like institutional, industrial, and we call it blue-green industrial. That's sort of the waterfront industrial. And then you can see on the right-hand side the future land use map that is both reflective of the kinds of land uses that already exist and forward-looking to describe the types of development that we would like to see and where we would like to see. Keep in mind that the city of Providence was largely built out by the 1920s. There was no such thing as comprehensive plan. There was no such thing as zoning prior to that. This place kind of miraculously came into being in a form that we know and love without a lot of regulation. These days, we have regulations that are important. They're for public safety, health, and welfare. They're necessary, and in part, they're necessary to kind of protect and preserve the best of what we have. But they're also necessary to sort of guide the market in such a way that development that we get is the development that we want. And that's what comprehensive planning is all about. Okay, so next slide here, future land use categories. We've got a whole bunch of them outlined in the legend, but it really boils down to 5 categories: commercial, mixed use, residential, institutional, industrial, and open space. I'm going to take these all one by one, and I'm going to describe the policies that we've set forth in the plan for these different categories. Okay, commercial and mixed use. These are, you will all know these as the major commercial corridors that we have in the city. These are the places of mixed use and vibrancy, where a lot of the neighborhood services are, but also where a lot of the housing is, a lot of the higher density housing. And we are essentially not proposing much change here. We think these corridors and the zoning that goes along with them are functioning well. We're in an effort to sort of streamline the way we do things. We are proposing to combine our C1 and C2 zones. These are both neighborhood commercial zones. The regulations are largely the same. And we think that they both could be refined a little bit. But at the end of the day, there's so little difference between them that we think that we only really need one neighborhood commercial zone. So that's kind of the big idea for commercial. And just to sort of illustrate what we're talking about, when you know, this is kind of the traditional development that you might see in the C1 or C2 zone, 3 to 4 story buildings, often with ground floor, commercial, retail, restaurant. And the upper stories, in some cases, might be commercial, but often it's residential. These are great places for higher density residential, especially in commercial corridors that are served well by public transit. These are some examples of newer development in these commercial corridors. Maybe using more modern building typologies, maybe nodding to traditional building architecture, maybe using more modern building materials, but still having that sort of the standard of, you know, a ground floor that is typically commercial and residential above. These corridors don't all have, the buildings on these corridors don't all have to be commercial. You know, these days, there's been a lot of shifts in our economy, and we don't always see a high demand for neighborhood commercial. We want to preserve what we have, and we still want to allow for it, for sure. But given that you know, a lot of people are shopping in different ways these days, the last thing that we want is vacant storefronts, and if those ground floors can be used for housing, and it can be done in through design and in a proper way, we think that housing is also a good use anywhere in this place. Okay, now I'm going to talk about residential. This is where we are proposing the most significant changes in land use in the comprehensive plan, and I'm going to talk about the 3 categories of land use that we're identifying in the future land use map that will eventually turn into our zoning categories. Low density, medium density, high density. Low density primarily corresponds with the single family zones in Providence. As you know, we have some single family zones in Providence. Unlike many other communities in Rhode Island or even large cities elsewhere in the country, our single-family zones are relatively modest in size, but we do have them, and they are valued by a lot of people. So we propose to preserve this low-density land use designation. However, recognizing that that all of the residential areas in the city can contribute to housing production. We're proposing a couple of changes. One is to allow for accessory dwelling units, one accessory dwelling unit per lot in all of the residential lots, whether it be in low density, medium density, or high density. Also in the low density areas where today really the only type of housing that's allowed is single family detached. That's a single family house standing by itself on a lot. We think that there's some other types of housing that should be allowed in these low density areas. I'll talk about these. I'll illustrate them in a minute. Cluster development, low density row houses, and even the potential of small apartment buildings. Medium density, these are the areas that today correspond with our 2-family and 3-family zoning. The idea here is to make it easier to build what already exists. In the R2 zones, I'll illustrate for you in a minute. There are already many 3 families and multi-family buildings in these zones. When R2 came into existence in the 1950s, you know, the city was in a period of a decades-long contraction where we didn't need as much housing as we had. Keep in mind, the city had a population at its peak in the 1940s of 250,000. By the 1970s, we were down to about 150,000. That's a lot of housing that we didn't need. So the R2 zone was sort of an attempt by planners at the time to sort of scale down the density of our residential neighborhoods. But in those areas, there had been allowed much higher density. So what we're proposing here is to kind of upzone those areas. So one of the big ideas of this plan is that wherever we have 2-family zoning, we would upzone that to 3-family zone. And then finally, the high density areas that correspond to the categories of residential professional and the R4 multifamily zone, we would allow for apartment buildings, and we are proposing that there are areas of the city that are currently 3-family where we see a preponderance of higher density uses. We're proposing to do some rezone to the R4 high density. Okay, this is what we're talking about with accessory dwelling units. And in fact, the state has passed a law recently that requires us to do this. We've already been planning to do this. We think it's a good idea, and we're glad that the state is actually requiring it, not just in Providence, but in every community. Because let's face it, Providence shouldn't be the only community in the state to absorb the housing that you need in the state. All other communities need to do their part. They should not be exclusionary. So ADUs are one strategy. It's not going to produce thousands of units, but it could produce dozens or hundreds of units without really changing the built environment, the residential fabric of our neighborhoods. These are units that can be built in existing houses, in underutilized basements or attics, provided that you can provide safe egress. They could also be provided in outbuildings, converted garages or purpose-built buildings in yards provided that they are smaller in scale, that they meet certain setback regulations, that they be designed in such a way that they are subservient to the main structure. I had the pleasure, with you, Mr. Chair, of being at the grand opening of this accessory dwelling unit off of Westminster Street. Two-car garage that was converted into an affordable, a one-bedroom apartment, lovely little space that provides one new unit of housing.
Beautiful.
Multiply this out by hundreds, and this is a good way to use housing. Row houses, we don't have a lot in Providence, unlike some cities, like, oh, sorry, did I go over there? Unlike some cities where the row house is kind of the standard form, we tended to our density, usually comes in the form of a triple decker, but we do have some examples of row houses, and we think that that they should be allowed across the board from our lowest density to our highest density zones. Because they're a great typology and they can be a little bit more efficient to build because you can get economies of scale and build more than one unit. Also, they avoid certain issues that we have with building codes because they have fire separation that's between individual row houses. You don't have to sprinkler them like you have to sprinkler a triple decker. We don't see a lot of triple deckers being built today because of the building and fire codes. There might be some movement on that at the state level, maybe to exempt triple deckers from sprinklering, but for the time being, that's the law. In any event, we think row houses are a good tool. Cluster development, we really don't have any of this in Providence, but this is a technique where you take the density that might be allowed on a large parcel of land and sort of concentrate it in an area where it's appropriate, and it's used often to preserve portions of a large site that might be environmentally sensitive, that might, for example, have large significant trees that you don't want to take down, and you don't want to destroy their root systems. You might have historic features of the site that you want to preserve. You might have, say, a wall around a former estate, where you don't want to have to cut into it for individual driveways. It might be more efficient to have just one driveway with a larger parking area and then houses clustered kind of away from the edges. So we think that this could be a good technique for some types of properties. Adaptive reuse. This is a technique where we take a building that was designed for non-residential. On the left here, we've got a former industrial facility out in Olneyville that's been converted to 60 units of affordable housing. A magnificent building that is not only has the square footage that can be converted to housing, but it's also a historic structure. So in this case, you preserve a historic building and you get housing. And in the case here, you also get affordable housing. So really 3 big wins on one parcel. We want to make sure that our regulations allow for easy adaptive reuse of these projects. On East Street, on the east side, this is one that has been converted to condos more than 20 years ago. This has been condos for as long as I've been in Providence. Okay, let's talk a little bit about R2 and why we think that these areas should be upzoned to R3. This diagram shows the preponderance of 3 units or more in our R2 zones, and just a couple of examples, that we drew up, one from Fox Point and one from the Elmwood neighborhood. You see all that blue. If you did this same sort of land use, evaluation for the R3 zones, they would look very similar, with a similar mix of 1, 2s, and 3s, and even multifamily zones. So this is why we think that the R2 zones, excuse me, citywide, could be upzoned R3. The development patterns are virtually the same, and the infill development that we expect to see through this upzoning would be substantially similar to what's already there. Importantly, what this does is it allows people to take buildings that have been artificially constrained in how many units they can have. How many, we all know of the 2-family houses that have an unfinished attic. Those houses, when they were originally built, they were designed to be expanded. But maybe someone decided to just get the 2-family model because they couldn't afford to, at the time, to add the additional kitchens and bathrooms, and bedrooms and finishes of an apartment. But they were built with, in many cases, 2 means of egress. And the space sits there vacant. And what a perfect way, without changing anything in the built environment, to add units. These days, we have to tell property owner after property owner, we're sorry, the law does not allow you to add that unit in that empty attic space. And by the way, we know that there are probably hundreds of illegal units that were created in spaces like this. Not out of greed necessarily, but out of the fact that we need the housing. And maybe those units were created in such a way that they weren't inspected because people recognized that they were gonna have to tear them out. So this would allow those property owners to kind of come out of the shadows and legalize units that already exist. Okay, so again, you know, this is exactly what we're talking about. There's your 2.5 story on Lenox Avenue, that's in the 2-family zone. If that attic is unfinished today, we would have to say to them, sorry, you cannot make it well there. You know, examples in Fox Point, examples in Silver Lake. And then we have on Elton Street here, this is an example in a 1-family zone of an apartment building. You know, once you understand where these zones are and you start looking around, you realize, wow, these things are all over the place. And we love them. This is what we call character. This is what we call neighborhood character. And what's wrong with it? If there's nothing wrong with it, then let's allow it. Again, Blackstone Boulevard is all 1-family zoning. But how many apartment buildings are there on Blackstone Boulevard? A lot. Ontario Apartments down in the county. Same idea. All right. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about design standards. This gets at the not just the land use chapter, but also the built environment chapter. I will be the first one to acknowledge that we have some issues out there in the neighborhoods with development that I would say does not rise to the level of design excellence that it should in the city. I think Providence, because of its history, because of its outstanding built environment, deserves new development that does not necessarily have to look historic. Doesn't even have to be in sort of historic patterns. It can be very modern, but it has to be high quality. And we need to insist on high quality. Because we want the new development to be just as character defining as the old ones. We don't want houses that are designed, with minimal detail, minimal standards, and that will, in some cases, looks shabby from day one, and certainly in 10 or 15 years, it's going to look even more shabby. So this is going to be a challenge for us because we don't necessarily want to create a whole new regulatory structure that is going to take all of this new development capacity that we hope will result in more housing and grind it to a halt because we're going through iteration after iteration of design concepts. That I don't think that's going to serve us well. There's a place for very stringent design review, and that place is in our existing historic districts and in downtown. That design review exists today. It's rigorous, it's tough, it's not to everybody's liking, which is why I always say when it comes to historic districts, be careful of what you ask for because these are very restrictive regulatory environments. But that design review has its place. We do, again, acknowledge that we can do a better job with the regulations that we put into place and also with the processes that we use for the review projects. And we think through the zoning process that there will be opportunities to improve our regulations. We've already developed a list of, just by going out into the neighborhoods and looking at some of the new development that we've seen, what's wrong with that house? I've been circulating this to my staff and we've been brainstorming. The absence of easy things like window trim. Unpainted raw pressure treated lumber being used on exterior steps and porches. Those building materials were never intended to be used in those ways. But developers are kind of, in some cases, looking for the lowest common denominator. So the hope here is that we can put in regulations that will make it clear about what we want, that will not add significantly to the cost, that will improve the longevity of these buildings over the long term. And then also we want to put in place processes where the review can be quick and easy and most often administrative. Okay, just want to point out that we have an interactive map online that sets forth all of the zoning changes that we're proposing to do. And so that you can zoom in right down to the property level and see where these changes are proposed. For example, we're looking to change the R2 zone to R3, where we're looking to add the higher density R4 zone, where we're looking to consolidate the commercial C1 and C2 zone. So all of that is available on it. Okay, I'm going to just go through the last couple of categories very quickly. Institutional zones, we're not proposing any changes to our institutional zones, to the size of them, to the location of them. We are going to propose some amendments to the institutional master planning process, specifically around what we expect from colleges regarding the behavior of their students, which we get complaints about on a routine basis. With respect to the industrial land uses, the main, shift here in our policy is that, we want the industry, we make it clear, we want industry in our city, we want job centers in our city, but recognizing that there are, sometimes conflicts between industrial uses and the, rights that people have to live in safe, healthy neighborhoods. The change in emphasis is towards, the growth of clean and sustainable industries. That we are, preparing for, and even proactively, making that transition away from carbon intensive industries. And allowing for, our zoning ordinance to prohibit any uses that we collectively deem to be contrary to the public health of our city, and to be contrary to our climate goals. Okay, and then I think this is the last land use category here, open space. And we identify all of our open space zones that correspond with our city parks and our conservation districts that are for woodlands, passive recreation, and also our public space zones where we have our city facilities, and we have both policies that are largely unchanged. Basically preserve and expand our open spaces and our conservation areas. I think we can all agree that our Parks Department has done a wonderful job of improving the park spaces that we have and looking for opportunities for new space all the time. Okay. I think we are just about at the end. Next steps. Next Monday, September 16th, that so many of us have been waiting for, the beginning of the official public hearing. We will be in the council chamber, and you will hear from many members of the public. And I believe that you are going to hear a really good representation of what we have been hearing for the past 2 years and what you have been hearing from your constituents all along. And, you know, as sometimes challenging as it can be to go through these engagement processes, I can say that this has been a truly rewarding process. We don't all agree, and that's the nature of the way that we do business as a city. We've got to get to a document that represents the best possible consensus that we can find, you know, among the legislative and executive branches, and that I think does a service and justice to all of this community engagement that we've been doing. The people that have come to these meetings, you know, week in and week out, again, we may not agree, but, you know, I salute their tenacity and their willingness to take time out of their lives to do this. It's amazing. We expect that this public hearing will, at the conclusion of the session on the 16th, that we will have a whole lot of information gathered. We will take copious notes. We will ask that the hearing be continued for 2 weeks until September 30th, where we can come back to you with some thoughts and ideas and amendments that you can incorporate into the document. And if you were satisfied at that point by the 30th, this committee, the ordinance committee, can vote it out. The committee is sent to the full council. What everybody needs to understand is, because of the way the law is written, if it goes to the full council, and the council does not approve it and sends it back to committee, we have to start over the advertising process. A little expensive, once a week for 3 weeks in the journal, so we hope that, by the time we are finished on the 30th, this is a document that has a good runway for approval by the full council. Full council has to approve this by ordinance. That means 2 passages on 2 separate dates, which takes us into October, potentially November. And then we'll have an approved comprehensive plan, but the job isn't done yet because then we have to implement it through the zoning process. We're already working on those zoning amendments. And we hope to have those ready in the fall for consideration by this body as well. And then finally, the state of Rhode Island has to approve our comprehensive plan. We expect that process should be completed by January. And that's the end of my presentation. And you're more than happy to take any questions or comments, something like that.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was pretty in-depth. Thank you so much. Great presentation. And we do have a tight agenda in the next couple of weeks as we need to get this through. And but we do have the opportunity to view this, to vet this, and to look into it. I expect the council to have a bunch of questions. So we'll start with Councilor Harris.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for just really being thorough and focusing on affordable housing. As you know, we all know there is a crisis around housing. So this makes me excited to see this part of how you just really focus in. I have a question around, which I didn't notice or pick up on, maybe you probably mentioned it. I've heard people talk about the tiny houses and space for that. Did you mention that, or is there opportunity to talk about what type of zoning that may call for, and what type of layout?
Great question. So I didn't talk specifically about it, but you know, tiny houses, you know, it's kind of a generic term for a house that's very small. Often they're prefabricated. In some cases, they can arrive on the site fully built on a flatbed truck. It's a way of creating housing that's much more affordable than a large house because they have smaller floor area and often they're built off-site. There can be some economies of scale there. We allow for tiny houses today. There are no, believe it or not, there are places where they say a house has to be at least a certain square footage. We don't have anything like that. I would consider that to be an exclusionary zoning practice. So we allow for tiny houses. And not only that, we allow for very small lots to be developed. You can put a single family, you know, depending on how you can comply with the regulations, you could put a house on a lot of virtually any size of Providence. So between tiny houses and tiny lots, that's a good way of getting some housing production. Tiny houses can also be used as accessory dwelling units, which we're proposing to now allow. And so these could complement a main structure on a house, but placed elsewhere on a lot. So we're big fans of tiny houses.
Mr. Chair,
Sure.
I was also excited to see that design review. I know a lot of that, and I was so excited to my earlier part of joining the council, be a part of discussions with my community and my neighbors, because a lot of the proposal of new construction and new housing or whatever did not match the neighborhood. And so, of course, they came after you and I was calling them, you know, to learn more about, you know, what does that mean? And so I was glad to see that purposely, this had been pointed out when Tim been able to do a good job, purposely pointing out how important that is to our neighborhoods and to our, you know, to each of our communities. So I just wanted to express myself around that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have for now. I know there's other stuff waiting, so we'll get out of time.
So before we open up to the next, what I want to thank the chat who is joining us. The meeting and start. Actually, roll now.
Committee members?
Yes. I mean, you.
Oh, that's great. Well, I was gonna have committee members go first, so thank you, Bob. Thank you, Tim, for all the great work that you're doing. It's great to see the plan before us, and I know there are lots of nuances and nooks and crannies here, and I am grateful that we're doing something to address the affordability crisis in our city. And it's clearly needed. We've been hearing it all across our city. We need to figure out how we're going to reduce rental prices, reduce housing prices, reduce the burden that people experience in every single neighborhood across the city. With that being said, do you think that it requires a lot of nuance? And I know we've had these conversations, but I just want to share it with the rest of my colleagues. Theoretically, we just look at this in theory, not contextually. If we, it's basic economics, if we increase the supply of housing, meet the demand, theoretically, the prices will come down. However, when we look at this contextually, I'm just speaking on behalf of my ward, and we see this in other areas of the city as well. There's not a lot that will incentivize a developer or a landlord to reduce prices, regardless of how much housing stock we have if the market calls for it. So for example, in Ward 1, we've got landlords that are charging $3,000 a month, $4,000 a month for rents. Even if we increase the supply, because the market is currently commanding those prices, contextually, we're not sure if the prices are coming down, and it would be naive to suggest that landlords are going to altruistically just lower their prices because we all of a sudden have a lot of demand or a lot of supply to meet the demand across the city. So when I've looked at other comp plans, you know, Seattle's comp plan, for example, there's specifically language that ensures tangible protections for anti-displacement. The reason why I bring this up is because historically, we saw it with urban renewal. In the 1960s, Fox Point, neighborhood that I represent, was a predominantly Cape Verdean, Irish, Portuguese immigrant community. People purchased their homes for not what they can't afford today, but the values have skyrocketed over time. Many of those people, including my family, have been largely displaced from that community because of the development pressure. Now, if we have broad-based upzoning across the entire city, developers are going to naturally want to maybe demolish properties and upzone those properties in order to make a profit, which could put a lot of development pressure on their immediate neighbors, whose assessments are likely to go up if there's more development that's occurring. And we're just allowing, you know, R2 to go to R3 and R3 to R4 and C1 to C2. So what protections, tangible protections, are in the comp plan to ensure anti-displacement strategies, and to also ensure that there's tangible protections, not just, you know, a boilerplate language that says we care deeply about anti-displacement, but real codified law and ordinances and regulations that ensure that our communities aren't at risk of further displacement that will make Providence theoretically more unaffordable for residents, especially because that's what we're trying to address. We're trying to alleviate the the affordability crisis. So that was a long-winded question, but I just wanted to get it out there, and then I have a follow-up, if that's okay.
Okay, so, there's a lot in your statement and the question. So when it comes, the first thing is, when you talk about prices, about supply bringing prices down, it would have to take a whole lot of supply before prices get down. Because the market right now, it's like a bottomless, the demand for housing is like a bottomless pit. We're not building housing nearly fast enough to address the demand, and the prices are reflecting that. And for prices to come down, it would take thousands and thousands of new units in the city for prices to come down. Now, keep in mind that construction costs are extremely high these days. The last time I saw a number of the cost of a single housing unit, it's over $400,000 to build. So I think it would be naive for us to suggest that that prices are going to come down unless we see, some kind of, shock in the market. I mean, it does happen. We saw it after 2008, there was a huge run up, and then prices crashed because there was, we know in retrospect that there was financial bubble. I don't think we're seeing that today. I think what we're seeing today is that because of the crash in 2008, and because of all the ramifications following that, and then because of the pandemic and supply chains and materials and so forth, and inflation, there's been historically less housing developed than there would have been without these kinds of shocks. So I think that probably, I'm just being realistic, probably the best we can hope for is that prices will moderate, or the increase in prices will moderate. So, and hopefully incomes, the biggest issue with affordability is that income hasn't kept up with housing inflation. So if we can see some moderation in the increase in housing, and we can also see some rise in incomes, then maybe that sort of the ability of people to afford housing, market rate housing, won't be as extreme as it is today. So allowing for more housing production is, from our perspective, the most important things that we can do. Now, when it comes to anti-displacement
Or anti-gentrification, whatever term.
sure. When it comes to I just want to talk about anti-displacement first of all. Again, supply, because if people have been renting long-term and the rents are fluctuating in the market because of inflation, and there's not enough housing coming into the market, then we're going to see spikes, continue to see spikes in rent more than we would if we had more housing, and that's going to be a displacement. That's going to produce displacement and gentrification. I think the two, are kind of two sides of the same coin. So what can we do about it? The most important anti-displacement policy that we have available to us is when is the way that we have produced affordable housing. Or, uppercase A, affordable housing, which is, is subsidized through some sort of mechanism. Like federal low-income housing tax credits. Through state programs, other federal programs, through the city's affordable housing trust. And also subsidized through our 8% affordable housing property tax. All of those subsidies combine to reduce what people who live in this housing have to pay. And most importantly, that housing is deed restricted such that as long as your income qualifies, you get to stay in that. If your income goes up and you're no longer income qualified, then congratulations, maybe you can afford to live in a place that's not deed restricted. But if you can't, that's the best anti-displacement policy that we have. And I think it's frankly the best one that there is in the economy that we have. Providence has done an incredible job of creating affordable housing through this mechanism to the extent that we have the highest percentage. I think except for maybe one or two other communities in the state, we have the highest percentage of units that are deed restricted affordable. We are well in excess of the 10% mandate that the state requires of every community. We are one of only, I believe, 6 or 7 communities in the whole state that exceed that 10%. And the good news is that we haven't lost ground. With all the development that we've seen in the past decade, we've managed to create enough of it such that we haven't seen an erosion in that percentage. We're at between 14 and 15% affordable. There's never enough money to meet the demand for affordable housing. But with the help of the council, we've been able to have an infusion into the housing trust of the recovery money in recent years that's been fantastic. It's been enough to create, I think, over 1,000 units of housing. So we're dedicated to doing that. That is a cornerstone of the housing section. So this is not easy. I don't believe that any community has solved this. And frankly, the development pressure that we see here is not as bad as it is in some communities. Especially those that have major jobs. So in some ways, we should be grateful for that. It doesn't mean we should rest on our laurels. We have seen this incredible spike in inflation of housing. I think you can tie issues of homelessness directly to that, and that's a shame. From our perspective, supply is the best answer we have, along with subsidy and deed restriction for affordable housing. Some of you may want to have this discussion about rent control or inclusionary zoning after I have that. If you want to ask that question, but I'll allow you to.
You'd say I had a second thought because Councilor Vargas, going forward, because we had about an hour-long presentation, so we want to keep this meeting under 2 hours. Just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Sure. So we have this meeting to, you proposing the planning, right?
Yes.
We're talking about zoning change. These all questions that so my colleagues are asking will be for next meeting, like a financial institution, and how we can do to protect the house. The problem is the 2x4 is $8 now. So that's the issue. into Home Depot and Lowe's, know the prices and the products that we use to build the house, is where we're going to see a change. But the question I have for you is Councilwoman Harris asked about the tiny houses. Or the mini house that we have back in the Foxy Lady's backyard there. Are you going to, you telling me that anybody can bring the little tiny house and put it right in the middle of the neighborhood? Or we want to pick up such neighborhoods where these little houses can go? Because I'm sure like if some neighborhoods won't like the little house to go into some areas that we're trying to figure out, right? So it's going to be called R1, single family, or where are they going to fall? Or we want to create a separate, like a separate entry, like for Casa Avenue that has a bunch of trailers in line.
I hear what you're saying. So our proposal is that they would be allowed, anywhere in the city in a residential zone. And, you know, look, sometimes you have a picture in your mind of what a neighborhood is like. What is the character, what is the fabric of the neighborhood? And then you get out there and you really look at what it is, and you realize that there's a lot more diversity in housing typologies than you might think. It's very common to see, you know, a single story shotgun ranch next to the triple decker. And, you know, I think these tiny houses they might be, you know, kind of curiosities, but they're pretty remarkable. I mean, I think they're fantastic. So I personally have no problem with seeing them used as.
Give me your address,
residence.
please.
Huh?
Give me your address. Oh, can I, another one? Thank you for the answer. Can I go another one?
So
Okay, this question will be like, okay, we're talking about your house. What about if I buy, a container? Put it in my backyard, cut the door, fix it up and leave on it. My friend has one. By in Connecticut, he fits it up, he put a roof on the top, and it's beautiful. It's long like as long as you can get 53 feet. What about if I had the idea to create a container as a tiny house?
Yeah.
So those are the restrictions that we have.
The thing, Councilwoman Ryan, we had a fight about it. A shipping container that someone put in his yard and he was using it as a storage shed. It still had the graffiti from the shipping yard. So, you know, shipping containers are interesting. We actually have a building, as you know, that was a whole office building that was built out of a series of stacked shipping containers. It's pretty innovative. You know, I think that the owners found that it was more complicated to do that than they thought it was gonna be. And we haven't seen a whole lot more of that done. When we talk about design standards, I think something like that can be done very well and appropriately if it's designed well, it's got nice detailing. If it's not like the most prominent thing on the site. But just like anything, I think that can be abused. We already have regulations about, we don't allow people to use shipping containers as storage facilities. I can't remember if we say anything about living. But it's something to consider. I would be wary about allowing those, especially the big ones that are like, you know, tractor trailer size.
So Bob, so will this new tiny house is considered new development?
Sure, yeah, you'd have to, you'd have to get a building permit for it, and you know, this is nothing new. You could do this today.
So how is that being impacted by your design and standard review?
Oh, so, well, that's a good question,
It's
you know,
interesting.
so, yes, so the thing for houses, we're talking about minimum standards that we get at, for example, trim around windows, the way, the building presents an entry to the public right of way, a certain amount of window glazing on the facades that are facing the street, because you don't want to see blind facades and things like that. So these buildings certainly can be designed in a way to meet those standards. And if they're not, then and if they can't be modified, then we wouldn't necessarily allow them. But I think that, from what I've seen, a lot of these prefabricated tiny houses, they can be done very elegantly in a way that fits in really nicely.
That's my walk, and then we'll have. For grades.
Oh, thank you. Can I ask two quick ones? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Bob and Tim. Now I've heard your presentation 3 times in the last 2 weeks, but I've learned something new every time. And,
Hopefully we're getting better.
yeah, you guys are like down. Quick question. So the C1, C2 merge, I guess I was wondering, so, it includes that new buildings can be up to 4 stories with incentives that can add up to 2 additional stories. In what scenarios would you allow additional stories? Like, how is this different for C1? Like, I'm thinking Hope Street, let's be honest, I'm thinking about Hope Street.
Yes.
Like, how would this change? Like, let's say someone tore down the Frog and Toad building. I hope that never happens. I can't even believe I said that out loud, but like, let's say that happened. What would allow someone to build something that's like 6 stories
Yeah.
there instead of
Yeah,
currently
yes, great question. Okay, so first of all, both C1 and C2 today allow for 4 stories.
Yeah.
With that allowance. Now, that allowance for extra height is built into the zoning ordinance. And this is what we call incentive zone. If you provide something in your building, we'll give you the incentive of added height and added floor area. Today, we allow this for a few different things. Mixed use, where at least half of the floor area is residential. Typically, that takes the form of ground floor commercial residential. That can get you, the city planning commission's standard practice has been, that gets you 1 extra story. If you provide structured parking, which requires you to use some of your floor area for parking instead of other uses, we typically allow for 1 and 2 story there. If you provide open space on your site that's accessible to the public, that again is typically good for 1 extra story. The only thing where we have recommended to the CPC and they have allowed for that additional height. By the way, these incentives are discretionary. City Plan Commission is not obligated to grant.
So these would go before the city.
They have to go, yes,
Have opportunity
yes.
to provide comment and like,
To
okay.
be clear,
That's-
yes, any zoning incentive requires a public hearing, whether it's downtown, in front of our design review committee, or the neighborhoods of the City Plan Commission. The only time when we would recommend and where the City Plan Commission would grant 2 extra stories is when it's for affordable housing.
And just,
And I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please stop, yeah.
The City Plan Commission has wide latitude to regulate the design of the structure to begin with, and especially if they're asking for more. So, for example, if they do want to go taller, the commission could say require upper stories to be set back in a certain way so that the impact is a little less problem.
okay, thank you. My other question, well, one is a comment and then a question. Have you guys checked to make sure the interactive map is working recently? Because I clicked on it this weekend and it wasn't working. So that's just a comment. We should check on that. I went to share it out and I was like, oh no.
So I was telling you that our IT department has had some issues with our public facing mapping tools, especially outside of work hours.
Okay, yeah, it was the weekend.
I have expressed my extreme concern over this, and I hope that those issues will be solved.
Okay,
Uh,
I just, in case you hadn't clicked on it recently, I just wanted to
There have been
flag.
times when it wasn't coming up for me. Brought that up,
Okay.
and I will continue. So,
Thank you.
and I will let them know that a member of the city council is trying to access something. We intend to be available to them.
Yeah, three members.
We intend to be available to the public at all times.
Yeah.
Just going to get this out.
Okay.
So, thank you for bringing that up.
No, thank you, because I was gonna share it in my newsletter and then I didn't because I was like, oh, people click on this, they're gonna be like, this is just a generic map of the whole city, no details. My actual question though is, do we, and this is a question I've gotten from some constituents, and I'm excited about all the in gentle density and all things like this. The question I got though is, do we have a, like, given our population is like roughly 190, do we have a target number of housing we're trying to build in the next? Is there a delta that we know? Like, is it 20,000 units? Is it, I'm making numbers up, so I'm not gonna keep doing that, but like, do we know what that delta is that we're trying to incentivize?
You know, we did this study a couple of years ago, at the comprehensive housing and
Oh, yeah.
displacement, plan. And it has numbers in there that
Oh, okay.
that talk about this is what we need, across the board at different levels of affordability. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but it's.
But they're in
the
there.
Thousands.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, thousands, and
Thousands annually. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Tim.
so as you can imagine, that's extremely ambitious and, you know, frankly, we produce, in the hundreds. I think over the last decade, we're, you know, like 400 or 500 annually, and to keep pace, we produce thousands.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Just for.
First year, not.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilwoman Gray.
As always.
Oh, you were in my notes. That's been great. Same thoughts.
No, I'm glad we asked her, but so I have two comments. Though. We were talking about the tiny houses. We already did tiny houses. The neighbor builders did a little cluster of them, and they went really quick. I don't think they had finished with the last nail and people go that is, so, and they really look nice. Now, they're on the back side of the street, I mean, you know, and back, yeah, behind them, they're old, they're there and they're beautiful.
One guy owns them, one guy.
One guy was all.
Only. Didn't go to the people who deserve them. Sorry
Well,
about that.
that's true. I well, you're not going to do that. And the other thing, is, the conference, the other small thing that I saw was the garage. And that was beautiful. I was totally amazed when I went in there and saw the room, that small space, the design was really fabulous. I really thought about selling my house. So I can see, because I would have never imagined, even looking at it outside, I still didn't expect that much of it. So I think we can do those things, and coming from Ward 12, a lot of our little lots and stuff, they're trying to not a lot of space.
When we look at Eston Street,
Yes.
Street, those
Yeah.
little,
I
they were built for workers in the mills, they're small. Which is a beautiful part of the character of the city.
I mean, we have a bunch of them, so I think that's something that we got to be interested in that area. I can't see us really, unless you go really high, and really can't see too much being built. Without.
Thank you, Councilor Gray. Council President Miller, please.
Thank you, they're doing over here. I think two things, I have like a comment and then a really specific question that I hadn't heard yet in this present. So I think that there are, the way the plan is written in positive ways, like it creates a lot more opportunity where before things were like a little more rigid, you have to get a one-off, you have to get a special use, and, you know, we saw in the last couple of years, and this is probably a good thing. Certainly in Fennel Hill and I think everywhere around the city, that like we kept having, the need to increase density on like these one-offs. And so I would encourage all of us counselors, and the public, like not get fixated on like, even with the idea of small homes and things, and like there are multiple, we're thinking about even just the ADU piece, there's so many different ways that these can show up, and we do have laws on the books that guide that. As we're talking about, and I know this tonight, but as we're talking about bringing, creating the opportunity to bring a few hundred more units online than we otherwise would, right? And I do think it is the absolute opportunity to talk about things like inclusionary zoning strategies that allow us to make sure that, to Councilman Gutfeld's point, that we're creating opportunity at every income level. I have a really specific question, which is, does merging C1 and C2 have any licensing implications? Are there still any licenses that are like allowed in C2 but not allowed in C1?
No. No, so where, zoning and licensing overlap would be for, bars, liquor stores, and, facilities providing entertainment. And as you know, there's actually an ordinance amendment pending in this committee for, entertainment. It can be applied equally in C1 and C2. And we allow the bars and restaurants equally, and to liquor stores. So I think, I mean, they certainly are in C1. Again, this is, we've had a long history of sort of zoning things out over time, but let me just,
Because we had a liquor store on Hope Street, and that was C1.
oh yeah, well, we have liquor stores and residential.
Oh, yeah.
There's non-conformities, all over the place, but let me just check here. Retail sales of alcohol, is, so that's one. Retail sales of alcohol currently is not permitted in C1, but it is permitted in C2. So when they do, so
Yeah.
when we combine these zones, there are gonna be some things where we say, well, maybe, maybe it's okay to you know, have that use allowed in both areas. And then there might be some things where we realize, you know, for example, drive-throughs is something we're thinking about. Maybe we don't want them. So I don't want to say that C1, that everything that's C1 will simply become what C2 is today. It's going to be a new zone where we step back and evaluate all of these. But I think with respect to licensing, you know, if it's allowed, we have the ability to get a license, and the licensing board has to use its own criteria to decide that.
Great. Anybody else that has not spoken? Councilman Pro Tem Vitale.
Thank you very much, as I said, and multiple times, I'll be a work and getting out in the community. For the first time, it's clear that it's a really part of this confidential plan. Now we're going to have another opportunity, whether it's not community, but a community meeting, then probably you guys know about next week. I look forward to that for people to look at and hopefully you report. Just out of a specific, in terms of the report address the infrastructure, creating these units and institutions, such as parking, infrastructure of sewer and water and so forth. And can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes.
Then the second one is in terms of, I know you referenced state, comp plan. And once we get approved, it's the state,
Yes.
what other opportunities does the public here have when it's time for those to say, and what does that process look like?
Okay.
And if you don't have that answer now, I think it's also very important to have, so that our residents feel that they can also chime in at that level.
Okay, so I'll start with your second question. The state review of our comprehensive plan is done by the Office of State Highway Management. And it's a very technical review. What they do is they look at there's a state law that requires every community to develop a comprehensive plan. And that state law says every comprehensive plan has to have the following elements, and they have a whole guide on how to do a comprehensive plan. And the plan also has to be consistent with what's called the state guide plan, which is like the state's own comprehensive plan. So they do the technical review, and they also take the plan and they send it to all state agencies, RIDOT, RIDEM, housing and so forth, and they review it. The issues that they're looking for are more, is this plan consistent with statewide policies? Which we're confident that it is. They don't have a public process. They farm it out, they get the comments back, they bring them to us. But there is a public process. If we have to amend the plan because of their comments, it has to come back to me. So that would be, and it has to come in front of this committee for a public hearing. So there would be a further process. I would suggest that, I hope, that we're not gonna have any surprises, and that what they require of us is going to be strictly technical. You know, the numbers wrong in one of the tables in the appendix, something like that. So that's that. With respect to infrastructure, in the community services and facilities chapter, we address public infrastructure. We address our water supply, our sewer capacity, our stormwater infrastructure. Some of which we have control over, some of which we don't. We have our own water supply board. Our sewers are a combination of city sewers and quasi state agency areas. They same thing, stormwater. And then the public utilities, gas, and cable, and fiber, and electric and so forth, obviously regulated utilities. So the good news with respect to public infrastructure is that we have still ample capacity to handle growth and development. There are areas where the infrastructure is taxed and where it is. Sometimes the developers have to upgrade public infrastructure. There, in general, is plenty of water, and in general, there's plenty of sewer capacity. Where we have problems, for the most part, with respect to stormwater management. This gets at another one of your questions, which is about parking, because the two are kind of tied together. Every parking space in the city creates an impervious surface that results in stormwater running off and going into our stormwater system, which gets overtaxed in large storm events. Not only does it cause localized flooding, it also causes impairment of our waterways. So, part of our strategy, in the comprehensive plan, and I realize this may not be, this may not be everybody's liking, but it's to de-emphasize, off-street parking. We don't want more development of parking. We want growth in the city, hopefully to happen without adding off-street parking. And strategies include, number one, making the most out of the paved surfaces that we already have, which for the most part are public streets that have parking lanes. And we think that allowing people to park on the street, even overnight, is a great way to use that existing pavement. We also feel that working with partners at RIPTA, with Amtrak and MTA service that we have in Providence, with the new innovations in ride sharing, car sharing, micro mobility, bike sharing, that more than ever in Providence, it's possible to live without a car. And we think that with increased density and increased mixed use in the city, the goal is that we have even more of those areas where that's possible. So, we stopped short of saying that we want to eliminate off-street parking requirements. We actually think that it's a possibility. And I think that's a discussion that we want to have with you as we move into the zoning phase. We think that at the very least, we want to reduce some of our parking requirements. I've been told multiple times by affordable housing developers, if I didn't have to provide this much parking, I could provide more housing. And I will provide more housing if I don't have this. That's a signal to us. And I've also heard, by the way, from housing developers, I built the parking because it's required and I have surplus of parking. The last thing we want is to require people to build parking to pave services, to cause more stormwater runoff, to inefficiently use land, and have it not.
All right, is that it, for time?
Yeah, I think that was.
I thought if we'll end it here, we just want to be respectful to the time. We're gonna have another opportunity on Monday. Are you available? Good question.
Yeah, quick question. Thank you, Chair. One quick question,
I can't take another councilman Barker.
you want to make, I can't believe
You
it.
gotta finish, you can't say no to them.
And then this plan, I want to make an addition to my existing house. Do I need to dig? Or I can go on flat?
Either one. You do not have to have you have to have footings that are sufficient to support the house. But you don't have to have a basement. So there are different ways of doing it without doing significant excavation.
That would be an extra runoff for the water on the need if you don't dig.
Yeah. So, you know, the same thing these days is that the regulatory agencies, not just our DPW, but also American State Commission, they're requiring devices to control stormwater on site. So in some cases, you may have to put in some drainage facilities like subsurface drainage so that you reduce the runoff.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. Thank you so much for very
Thank you.
informative. Thank you so much. And to the public, we will have a public hearing on Monday at 5:30, September 16th. You have an opportunity to speak, and to keep an answer question. I think it's a great, way to start this conversation about something that is so important as the comprehensive plan. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to continue. Motion is made by Council.
Motion.
Harry, second by Councilman Vargas, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yeah, that is, this meeting will continue And being that there is no further item on the agenda, I would then motion to adjourn.
So move.
Councilor Bartek, second, Councilwoman Marvel.
And
All in favor?
second,
Aye.
second.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.